have some water. Let's wait for one of my staff to come in. They'll be coming. Water. Okay, thank you for coming. I'm proud to be joined by Senator Murray, Senator Merkley, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Kim, and Senator Murphy, I believe, is on his way. Look, last night, President Trump plunged the country into chaos without a shred of warning. The Trump administration announced a halt to virtually all federal funds across the country. In an instant, Donald Trump has shut off billions, perhaps trillions of dollars that directly support states, cities, towns, schools, hospitals, small businesses, and most of all, American families. This is a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous. Funds for things like disaster assistance, local law enforcement, rural hospitals, aid to the elderly, food for people in need, all are on the chopping block in this new administration. Why? They need tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy, and these cuts, they think, will fund them. Every one of our offices has been deluged with calls from people who are in panic. What is this going to mean? What if I have a hospital that has people on life support? What are we going to do? And just like the January 6th pardons, this decision is lawless, dangerous, destructive, cruel. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. I spoke to my Attorney General this morning. She's head of the State Attorneys General Association. They're going to court right away on this horror. This, plain and simple, this is Project 2025. Project 2025 by another name. They knew how unpopular Project 2025 was, but the right-wing ideologues are still in control. So they had to do it in a different way, but it has the same consequences and will have the same horrible, negative, overwhelming reaction from the American people. And who is going to be the implementer of this? None other than the chief cook and bottle washer of Project 2025, Russell Vought. Putting someone like Russell Vought at OMB, the architect of Project 2025, is a huge danger sign to America.
Attorney General calling you back.
Nope.
You can put him on speakerphone. Yeah.
No. My grandson lost his first tooth. It's a very big occasion.
That's worthy of a call.
And I told his mother to put $10 under his pillow. I used to get a quarter. All right. Anyway, having Russell Vought at OMB with this power is just frightening. Not to us, although we are going to fight this tooth and nail, but to average American people who depend on this. And what does Vought want to do? Well, you saw it in his blueprint, Project 2025. Eradicate basic services, eradicate investments that help tens of millions of Americans, all so they can pay for the tax cuts for the ultra-rich. It's hard to overstate how destructive this decision is for the country. He has a lot of really bad decisions for which the American people will rebel, and politically is going to be very unpopular. But this is the worst of the worst. The worst of the worst. In our states, we've talked to people, every one of us. People are scrambling to figure out what it means to them. We're getting panic calls. How are people going to make mortgage payments? How are small businesses going to keep their staff if their federal funding is shut off? Virtually any organization, school, state, police office, county, town, or community depends on federal grant money to run its day-to-day operations, and they're all now in danger. Nonprofits that help disabled veterans are in danger, thanks to Donald Trump. Funding that supports our transportation system and infrastructure is now in danger, thanks to Donald Trump. Hospitals, particularly rural hospitals, and community health centers are now in danger because of Donald Trump. Meals on Wheels are in danger because of Donald Trump. Our cops and firefighters are in danger, thanks to Donald Trump. Funding for the non-security grant program, which protects synagogues and temples from anti-Semitic attacks, we saw one in my neighborhood just Sunday, is now in danger, thanks to Donald Trump. The blast radius of this terrible decision is virtually limitless, and its impact will be felt over and over again. It's not going to hit each American family in one way. It's going to hit them in multiple ways. The only people who might be immune to this are the ultra wealthy, who they want to give a tax break to. The Trump administration is robbing Peter to pay the billionaires. American families, make no mistake about it. The money being taken from them will be spent, but not on them. Instead of going to support for your community, it's going to the ultra-wealthy and the mega corporations. This is cruelty. This is lawlessness. This is a heist done on a national scale. No matter how much he may believe he does, the president does not have the authority to ignore the law, and we're going to fight this in every way that we can. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much. Look, we were coming here today to talk about a very simple resolution on a different kind of lawlessness by the president in response to him pardoning violent criminals and insurrectionists who attacked police officers. That resolution, so you know, very simply reads in its entirety, resolved that the Senate disapproves of any pardons for individuals who were found guilty of assaulting Capitol Police officers. Now, you're going to hear more from me and others regarding that resolution later on the floor today. But we are here today to respond to the OMB memo issued by the Trump administration last night. In a brazen and illegal move, the Trump administration is working to freeze huge amounts of federal funding passed into law by Republicans and Democrats alike. The scope of this illegal action is unprecedented and could have devastating consequences across the country for real people. We could see a screeching halt to resources for childcare, cancer research, housing, police officers, opioid addiction treatment, rebuilding roads and bridges, and even disaster relief efforts. He was just in California to witness the devastation, and now he is holding back that aid. Trump's actions would wreak havoc in red and blue communities everywhere. This is funding that communities are expecting, and this memo is creating chaos and confusion about whether these resources will be available to them. Entire budgets and payrolls across the country are carefully hinging on these resources. We are talking about our small towns, our cities, our school districts, our universities, and a lot more. Will local Head Start facilities get their funding? Will grantees at our local universities get the funding that they use to continue clinical trials? What does this mean for our homeless veterans we are working to get housed? Americans should ask themselves, is it woke to fund cancer research or to rebuild an unsafe bridge? All of these critical priorities are funded by the grants the Trump administration would pause tonight. This illegal move is a massive overreach by the Trump administration. The American people did not vote for this kind of senseless chaos. So I am urging the Senate Budget Committee Chair, Lindsey Graham, a fellow appropriator, to hold Russ Vought's nomination that was supposed to occur this Thursday. Republicans should not advance that nomination out of committee until the Trump administration follows the law. The law is the law. The Trump administration must immediately reverse course, follow the requirements of that law, and make sure that the nation's spending laws are implemented as Congress intended.
Senator Merkley.
As much as Trump desires it, the president is not a king. As much as Trump desires it, a law is not a suggestion. These are not questions of opinion. These are principles at the heart of our constitutional system. It's at the heart of our checks and balances. And thus we have a constitutional crisis. Just last week, Russell Vogt came before the Budget Committee in a hearing, and the things he spoke to laid out a three-part plan for this administration. Part one, salvage the programs that families depend on, be on their feet, and thrive and move into the middle class. Part two, borrow trillions and run up the deficit. Part three, give massive tax giveaways to the wealthiest Americans. What we saw last night was a huge implementation of part one, the attack on families across this country. This is the great betrayal for a candidate, Trump, who ran on supporting families, and President Trump, who's serving to attack families. Now, Russell Vogt refused to answer many questions about his plan, particularly to say he would not use the illegal impoundment strategy. Impoundment means the president treats an appropriation as a suggestion and decides whether or not to actually implement it or not. That was decided by the courts before 1974. In 1974, Congress said if you want to pursue withholding funds, you have to apply for rescission. And this was further affirmed when the Supreme Court vetoed the line item budget process. So these are not questions that are unresolved. This is why the budget Dems are going to call upon the postponement, 2-week postponement of Mr. Vogt's confirmation in committee, vote in committee, until we answer these questions and resolve this constitutional crisis.
Last night, in defiance of federal law, Donald Trump made the decision to stop federal funding, which, as my colleagues have pointed out, could impact everything and will impact everything from small businesses to local law enforcement to child care. I'm just thinking it was just a week ago that he took his oath of office. And I said that day that we have that swearing in, that inauguration in the Capitol for a reason. We don't have it over at the White House. That's because there are 3 equal branches of government under the Constitution. And the power of people that were in that rotunda came from the people who weren't in that rotunda. So as we stand here today, people should think about the mom who doesn't know if she can get her kid to childcare today. Or they should think about the teenager in a cancer study, hoping beyond hope that that's going to save his life. Or they should think about the people from Minnesota when last week on the day of that inauguration it was -6 degrees who depend on heating assistance. Those are the people that are standing up here with us today. So this memo, these 2 pieces of paper, came from a guy named Matthew Faith. Probably never heard of him. He is the acting director of the Office of Management and Budget. Well, guess what? He's not in the United States Constitution. The Congress is. And we were set up in Article 1, not Article 2, Article 1. Article 1 trumps Matthew Faith. And it is Congress's job to have the backs of the American people and look out for them. It is spelled out in the American Constitution. Maybe not in those exact words, but that is what the Founding Fathers meant. They didn't give that power to Matthew Faith. They gave it to us. I hope that our Republican colleagues will join us in taking this on. They have the majority in the Senate. They know what the Constitution says. And to add to that, they joined us in voting for this funding and to help with these very important causes. The cancer research, I use that as an example because a mom called me this morning about a clinical trial. That cancer research, they voted for. They're proud of it. They put it in their campaign TV ads. So they must join us in stopping this unconstitutional power grab by the Trump administration.
So this is an attempt by Donald Trump to seize power. That sounds like a provocative thing to say, but how else do you describe what we have watched happen over the last week? The broad immunization of political violence, the illegal firing of inspectors general there to make sure that the money of the taxpayers isn't stolen. And today, the illegal and unconstitutional decision to put the President of the United States and no one else in charge of who gets federal money and who doesn't. What President Trump is doing is seizing control of the federal budget and deciding by himself who gets money and who doesn't. For two reasons. One, he wants to bank money so that he can afford his massive tax cut for billionaires and corporations. But second, so that he can hand out money to his friends, to the companies that are run by his billionaire donors, to states that voted for him, to congressional districts with members of Congress who are loyal to him, and so that he can deny money to any organization run by Democrats, to companies that are competitors to his billionaire friends, to congressional districts represented by his political opponents. This is what a king does. This is not how a democracy works. One man does not decide how taxpayers' money is spent so that it only gets sent to the president's political friends and it gets used to punish his political enemies. The scope of the damage that will be done is enormous. To poor kids who rely on Head Start programs, to families who desperately need that cancer research done, to veterans who, if they miss one or two appointments, their life falls apart suddenly overnight. We have to understand what is happening in context, right? The president wants you to be distracted by the day-to-day announcements, but put together the pardoning of the violent rioters, the firing of the inspectors general, and today, the stoppage of federal funding, leaving the decision only to the political whims of President Trump, represents the gravest, most serious constitutional crisis of our lifetime, one that threatens to undermine the very premise of American democracy. And I'm glad to be standing here with my colleagues to raise this alarm.
As everyone up here has been talking about, we are getting phone calls and emails from our constituents, people back in our state, and the word that everyone uses is chaos. And as I've been thinking about it, I'll be honest with you, chaos is the point because chaos is their plan. This is going exactly as they want it to go. They could have chose a different way to try to figure out how to be more effective and efficient if that was actually their goal. But their goal is to sow chaos. And I hope the American people see this, because this is the style of governing, or quote-unquote governing, that we will see for the next 4 years. And the American people have to ask them, is this what they want? What we see right now, whether it's the actions we see with this with OMB, or the firing of the inspector generals and the independent advisors there, or what we saw at USAID and the leadership there, what we see right now, it's showing that the defining phrase of Trump's administration and the beginning of his administration isn't the golden age. It's a phrase that he used during the campaign, the enemy from within. that we see him now in the presidency, in the Oval Office, waging war against the American people, trying to think about solely how it is that he can attain and consolidate that power for himself. And who is going to be the people that struggle and suffer from it? It's going to be the American people. I wanted to read you this email that I got. We got this overnight. It said, "Good morning. We just heard that President Trump issued a memo temporarily freezing federal grants and loans effective at 5 p.m. today. This is obviously alarming to those who rely on federal funding to help people with disabilities. This is an organization that is trying to figure out how it is that they can help the Americans that need help the most, the support the most. The idea that this is going to cut off funding, put in jeopardy and throw into chaos people with disabilities, seniors, the people with healthcare needs, is cruel. But again, that's the point. They don't care about the collateral damage. They care about their own power, and they care about themselves."
Yes.
A couple of you, and Senator Kim alluded to this a moment ago, a couple of you tick through the specifics, maybe a phone call, an email you got from a hospital, a State Department of Transportation, what was said and what the specific project or grant was that would be affecting tourism. If I could hear a couple of examples.
I can just tell you that it's still 8 o'clock on the West Coast, and their calls are flooding in. Just sheer panic that at 5 o'clock tonight, the funds that they count on, whether it's for our schools, Title I, whether it's our hospitals who are doing research, whether it is our community health centers who are providing care for people in line right now in rural communities in my state, whether they will be able to provide those services tomorrow. I've used my appropriations committee all night long, has been trying to get in touch with the agencies to fully understand the impacts of this, and they're broad and, quite frankly, very poorly written. And this is exactly what Andy's talking about. The chaos that this is creating is horrendous. No one voted to wake up this morning and wonder whether their child would get the care they need, wondered whether or not their parents would be kicked out of a nursing home, wondered whether or not the research that is so critical to keeping their child alive at NIH would continue, whether the road, in fact, one of the calls I got was about the bridge between Oregon and Washington that we have been working on for 25 years. Does that mean all that work stops tomorrow? These are the kinds of calls we are getting because that is what this memo is stopping.
And I mentioned the example a little later in Minnesota, and they get up super early. But they are a mom, kid, teenager in a cancer trial. And these trials sometimes are funded by other agencies, but a lot of the funding is NIH funding, asking what's going to happen. Is this just going to stop right in the middle? That's a very real question right now. The LIHEAP programs. And by the way, we could go through example after example, and the reason so many of us led with this unconstitutional power grab and the chaos and corruption this involved is because there are ways to do this. We made very clear we were happy to join with them to find common ground on efficiency and things we could do better and ways we can save money for taxpayers. That's not what this is. They've just decided to come in because this is what he does. Chaos. See where the chips fall where they may. Innocent people hurt. Courts have to intervene. This is no way to govern, and it's certainly no way to govern for people who are reliant on this help.
Yeah.
You've been in bipartisan negotiations about funding the government in the coming weeks. What does this
March
do
14th
to
deadline.
those-
Look at, I and many of my colleagues have worked a long time to negotiate bipartisan bills. You do not pass appropriation bills in Congress in any year I've been here without bipartisan cooperation. That means you sit down at a table and you work out what we can all agree on. I don't love everything, they don't love everything, but we agree that this is what we fund, we pass it into law, we get the votes on both sides, the president signs it. Can you imagine what it's going to be like for any of us, either under this administration or the future administrations of any kind, if those agreements mean nothing? that somebody can sit back and say, sure, I'll give you that, knowing full well that their president's in power, and they will keep the funding out, not spend it out. We cannot function as a democracy in this country if we cannot respect and abide by our ability to make agreements in Congress. Congress holds the power of the purse. That is very clear in the Constitution, in the rule of law, and it is critical for us to be able to fund and make this country run in a way that's competent. Yes.
Senator, the senior Trump administration official just put out guidance to the press saying that this is not a funding freeze, it's simply guidance for agencies to review if grants, loans, and programs are in compliance with the president's executive orders.
Yeah, that's nice from somebody up at the top, but I'll tell you what's happening. To every single agency, school, healthcare agency that got that memo is going to say, I better be darn careful not to accidentally fund something that I'm not supposed to. So they stop everything. That is exactly what's happening. I don't care what they put out in some kind of qualifying thing. They put out the memo last night, and everybody's living by that.
And they already took employment action against people in one agency that they felt were violating their rules.
Yeah, that memo says this isn't a funding freeze. Instead, it's a funding freeze.
And it says, in accordance with the president's priorities. The point here is the president doesn't get to decide what programs to fund and not fund. He gets to execute the law. The laws are written by Congress.
Senator, do you, in the upcoming government funding bill, do you see any need to make clarifications to the law, whether it's spending classifications or otherwise, to make more explicit what a president can and cannot do?
The law is very clear right now, as Senator Merkley described to you. And in fact, when vote came before the Budget Committee, I asked him, are you going to follow the law? He said, well, we don't believe in that law. And I said to him, well, okay, so there's a speed limit, 15 miles an hour, 25. And that you don't like that because it slows you down. Does that mean you don't have to follow that because you don't believe in it and you went out and told your neighbors you didn't believe in it? No, the law is the law. The rule of law is what we all rely on to be able to have a democracy and a consistency in this country. And he is wrong. And we're going to fight him, as Senator Merkley has said, and we are going to tell our Republican colleagues we expect them to follow the law as well.
So then that being said, can you lay out more specifically what actions you do plan to take to try to restore funding? And specifically, Mr. Ranking Member, can you talk about the strategy to try to block Mr. Vogt's nomination and if you plan to block any other nominees of the president in protest?
We are speaking out loudly and clearly. We're having a press conference hours after we found about this. We are making sure that everyone understands what is at stake here. We are asking our Republican colleagues to join us. They too have something at stake in following the rule of law here, as I just talked about. And Senator Merkley is going to talk about the nomination vote for Vogt himself.
It's so profoundly disturbing, as Senator Murray has pointed out, to have someone stand before you and say, well, I just don't agree with what the court decided about the constitutionality of impoundments, and we're going to do what we want. How do you actually go forward if you have an executive who says, we only follow the law we want, we only fund the programs we want? Well, in the Budget Committee, the Democrats are calling for the vote on Russell Vogt's nomination to be postponed until this current crisis is resolved. And we do not have the power to specifically to answer to break a quorum. We do not have the power to force the chair, but I hope that the chairman of the Budget Committee, realizing how this attack on the foundations of our Constitution is unacceptable, will join us in standing together.
I'd like Senator Angus King to have a moment to speak as well.
This is a profound constitutional issue. What happened last night is the most direct assault on the authority of Congress, I believe, in the history of the United States. It is blatantly unconstitutional. Article 2 does not give the executive the power to determine budgets or expenditures. That power is vested in Article 3 in the Congress. And if this stands, then Congress may as well adjourn. Because the implications of this is The executive can pick and choose which congressional enactments they will execute. The president took an oath the other day to faithfully execute the presidency of the United States. That means to execute the laws that are passed by Congress, not edicts passed by the Office of Management and Budget. So I hope and believe that our colleagues on all sides of the aisle will realize that this is not a political discussion. This is not a programmatic discussion. This is an institutional discussion that goes to the viability and authority and expertise and work that's based upon Article 3 of the Constitution. This is just a usurpation of authority. As I say, I believe, I've never seen anything quite like this in American history. Richard Nixon tried to do it. The Congress passed a specific statute, which has been the concept, the basis of which has been upheld by the Supreme Court in Train versus New York. And to assert this power really renders the power of Congress a nullity. And as I say, I hope members of both sides of the aisle will realize this and stand up for the institution. James Madison said the interests of the individuals will enable them or empower them to stand up for the interests of the institution. And if this stands, this will redound to the detriment of both parties, whichever party is in charge. Imagine for a moment if Joe Biden did this, there was a Republican Senate, Republican Congress, and they passed a statute saying we want to fund Head Start, and Joe Biden said, no, I don't like Head Start, I'd rather put the money over here. We'd be hearing a lot of reaction, and the reaction should come from both sides. So as someone who has worked in the law and worked with the Constitution for many, many years, I was stunned last night to see this order. I thought first it was a production of The Onion because it's so grossly, blatantly unconstitutional and threatening to the foundation of the separation of powers under the Constitution. Thanks, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Last question?
Senator Murray, can you lay out some of the next legal steps? Senator Schumer mentioned the lawsuit. What do you see as the next steps?
Obviously, we're like 12 hours into this, and we have multiple state attorney generals as well as others who are looking at what our next steps can be in the courts. And I would say to all of the Republicans, we didn't come here to go through a bunch of court orders about current law. We came here to fight for our constituents, to make sure that they had the basic things that they needed every single day, including cancer research, roads and bridges built, their communities safe, police officers on the street that are protected, and we're going to keep fighting for them.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.